PechaKucha is a Japanese word for chit-chat and is the name of a presentation format created in Japan in 2003 by Astrid Klein and Mark Dytham, two architects looking for a way people could share their work quickly and simply in public. Since then, the idea has spread to over 700 cities around the world. At every PechaKucha Night, creative thinkers come together and share their ideas with only 20 images shown for 20 seconds each. PechaKucha, a fast, fun format. Find a location, join the conversation.
Welcome to the 31st PechaKucha Night Hamptons. My name is Irina. I'm the Senior Curator for Arts Reach and Special Projects here at the Parish Art Museum. I'm also going to be your MC tonight. PechaKucha is a very popular program here at the parish. We do it 4 times a year. It's a wonderful way to celebrate our community because we invite members of our community to talk about their work, life, and passions and how they live creatively here on the East End. I want to thank our Friday night sponsors who make these programs possible, our presenting sponsor, Bank of America, as well as Sandy and Stephen Pearlbinder. And tonight, there are PechaKuchas happening all over the world, for example, in the Czech Republic, in Burkina Faso, and right here in the Hamptons. So, it's really important that you support these people who have put themselves forward to prepare to talk about their life and their passion and spend a lot of time doing this. So, please give them a welcoming round of applause. We have 5 presenters tonight, and I will be introducing one by one. So, and one other thing, please turn off your cell phones. That's very important. Thank you. We start with Tria Giovan. She picked up a camera when she was 8 years old while growing up in the Virgin Islands. She has been a New York-based photographer since the early 1980s. Diverse, in-depth, and thoughtful subject exploration has defined her career with projects on New York's Lower East Side, the Virgin Islands, Rhode Island, Cuba, the Philippines, Sacaponic, and her own Sag Harbor backyard. A lot of places. A documentarian and preservationist working in the traditions of street photography, traditional landscape, and straight color work, Tria is drawn to subjects with historical relevance that offer engagement in the external world and insight into inner realms. Her work has been published and exhibited worldwide, with photographs in the collections of the Museum of Modern Art, the Brooklyn Museum, the Parish Art Museum, the Jewish Museum, and the New York Public Library. She has published 3 monographs. She's an enthusiastic beachgoer and ocean swimmer who marvels every day at the beauty of the East End. Please welcome Tria Giovan.
Thank you, Corinne, and thank you everyone at the parish. I'm really excited to be part of this event. It's just a really fun night, and I'm delighted to be here. Glad we're all here together. So, ready, set, go. My parents passed down their love of photography, my father with his Leicas, and my mother with her Nichromat, and arranged my first photography class at age 8. The beautiful and evocative places where we were raised, St. Thomas and coastal Rhode Island, informed my visual sensibilities and my trajectory as a photographer for over 40 years. I moved to New York City in 1984 and took my first trip to Cuba in 1990. Off limits to Americans with little tourism, it seemed the perfect place to photograph. I imagined its isolation meant it had escaped the development of much of the region. I hoped to rediscover the Caribbean of my childhood. I fell in love with Cuba immediately. The warmth of the people felt welcoming and safe. Its authenticity and complexity was evident and compelling. It was with a surge of urgency that I photographed, as it seemed poised on the brink of change. For the next 6 years, I divided my time between being in Cuba and figuring out how to get back to Cuba. I learned Spanish, read everything Cuba-related I could find, and talked nonstop about the place to anyone who would listen. I took 12-month-long trips over 6 years and visited all the major cities and towns, taking over 25,000 photographs. Exploring the island and developing relationships was enlightening and inspiring, as well as disheartening and disturbing, as the economy was in free fall. There were lines everywhere for scarce food and little fuel to be found. The Cuban people's resourcefulness and spirit in the face of such adversity was extraordinary. Despite all, everything was interesting about Cuba. I rarely put my camera down. It was intense and intimate. The connections I made were deep and affecting. And it was the subtleties and complexities of day-to-day Cuba I felt were crucial to capture. In 1996, Abrams published Cuba, the Elusive Island. 100 photographs were paired with a selection of texts by some of the country's most important writers. The Museum of Modern Art acquired several images, and the work was exhibited in Havana and New York City. My last trip to Cuba was 2000. The film boxes sat on the shelves for the next 15 years. 25 years after my first trip, realizing that the 6x9 negatives needed to be preserved, I scanned over 1,000 images. Re-editing the photographs through a prism of time and change revealed a new, more complex view of the work's historical significance, and the Cuba Archive was published in 2017. As a body of work born from complete engagement and informed perspective, it is both comprehensive and intimate. As a historic record, it chronicles 1990s Cuba and bears witness to the spirit and the integrity of a distinctive, resilient, and complex country and its people. In between my travels to Cuba and other parts of the world, life in New York City and the East End, I always returned to our family home in Rhode Island. I have been photographing the Blue House, its interior and the landscape, my parents, siblings, the cats, the pond, the garden, and the beech tree since the early 80s. I've always been interested in the interior landscape, its fluidity, and how seemingly random things strewn about can reflect a personality and a state of mind. It can be anthropological, with clues to decode, or psychological, with visuals ripe for analysis, revealing, especially when it's your own family. And then there's Flower, my muse and inspiration. In times of complicated family relationships and inevitable loss and sorrow, she enlivens and shifts the dynamic to the present and the playful. I return over and over to certain views, the pond, the beech tree, my brother's garden, and while the landscape endures, my siblings and I age, and my parents have passed on. These photographs are embedded with layers of memory, emotion, and personal symbolism, and they mark the passage of time. I see this work as a journal and a dictionary of images that, like words, can be woven in a variety of ways. The long-form narrative, short story, a memorial, and most recently poems, the theme being the threads that bind and the connection between self, family, and the significance of home. This is a portrait of my sister Suzanne. When my mother, a poet, could no longer see, I read her poetry out loud. I was inspired to diverge from a single image arrangement, instead allowing images their own magnetic polarity, to draw one to another like poetic lodestones on the page. I created If You Hear the Siren Song, a poet for my mother, by delving into the archive, searching for her literally and symbolically. I found her in a myriad of ways, in color, form, and light, making the connection between the material and the ephemeral and the metaphorical possibility of place. This is a piece about my father, Tony, entitled Plumb Line, as in a weight attached to a line to ensure centering. I use fragments to distill an essence and as a way to explore intimate bonds. I'm an engaged recorder of private moments, using my camera to be both present and at once at a protective remove. Next is Marty. She'd be thrilled to be seen here. She'd love to be the center of attention. I, however, have always preferred the background, to quietly observe the overlooked, nuance, and gesture, and to photograph with as little intrusion and drama as possible. Photography has been my guiding star and my saving grace, a way to navigate the world. After 40+ years, I feel so fortunate to still be compelled to take pictures, even when I have no idea who, if anyone, might ever see them, and what in the end they might actually mean. So I'll allow fluidity and patience when I consider my own work, either viewed through a prism of the present or presently shaped by events of the past. What I do know is that when I am photographing, I'm completely in the moment, where it is always now. Thank you.
Thank you, Tria. I think your ending words, being in the moment, is probably more important now than ever. And I also want to mention the works that we chose together for your Artist Choose Artist participation in an exhibition at the parish here last year, when we chose some images from Cuba, and we focused on celebration of life. And I think it's also very pertinent to the moment or the times that we live in. So thank you. Next, Irina Alimanestianu is a painter who was raised in New York, Switzerland, my home country, and France. She has spent much of her adult life between Eastern Long Island and Venice, California. Being by the ocean is central to her work. Her abstract paintings are a sensory reading of her surroundings, their past and present, as it is felt in the vibrational tones of the landscape, the light, and the towns and cities where she lives. Irina received an MBA from Columbia Business School in Manhattan in 1989 and an MFA from Claremont Graduate School in California in 1998. Her work has been shown in museums such as the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles, the Jones Center for Contemporary Art in Austin, Texas, and here at the Parish Art Museum. Her work is collected by numerous foundations, and she has shown in New York and Los Angeles. Please welcome Irina Alimanestianu.
Hello. Keeping everybody safe.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm delighted to be here and grateful that we are able to have such gatherings. I'm a painter. My work is about relationship and connection, both at a macro and a micro level. The slides behind me cover various periods of my creative output. I started painting in earnest when I was pregnant with my first son. He is now 29, and I have been painting ever since. Over time, my style has evolved from representation to abstraction. As I painted, I came to realize that everything that we know and are is interconnected. Humans, plants, solar systems, minerals, sea waves are all part of one organism. We are part of the same scientific truths and collective unconscious. My childhood inadvertently led me to question and observe as I moved from one environment to another. I grew up partly in New York, France, and Switzerland, and I bounced from one to the other, being fully immersed in the cultures and landscapes. My parents, as Romanian refugees, wanted me and my siblings not to simply experience Europe, but to be imprinted by it. I literally went from dodging cow dung in the fields outside of our summer residence, a French chateau, to taking the bus to public school in Nyack, New York. The chateau in France had stunning 18th and 19th century paintings, a private chapel, Louis XV furniture. It was a step back in time that I cherished every summer until the age of 13. We picked mushrooms, swam in lakes, went to tea parties, and witnessed the cooks skin rabbits for dinner. Meanwhile, in Nyack, New York, in the 5th grade, I was bused to a large middle school and there quickly learned to navigate a racially charged playground. I was constantly adjusting to different mores. I had to learn the table manners of the French versus the Americans, a daunting task as the French were quite particular. On Sundays in New York, I attended Orthodox services. In France, we followed the Catholic traditions. The differences between their rituals presented another opportunity for me to make comparisons. My father was an inventor, a civil engineer focused on sustainability. His ideas reflected a future reality, not the present one. And as such, with an inventor father, we went from well off to broke and back again. As kids, we understood financial instability. For me, it felt like I grew up between cultures, between convictions, between social and economic identities, the space between where ambiguity and observation lie. In graduate school, I began to explore archetypes and social structures using dolls and wallpaper as catalysts. I was interested in the similarities between peoples, their overlapping concerns and quests. For example, blind justice is broken into 4 quadrants with a circular overlap of different religious and moral imagery. I brought together Sufi trumpeters, angels at the gates of heaven, blind justice, and the Hellenistic owl of wisdom. The next painting is the portrait of a woman. It includes her profile, the classic Roman female nude, Victorian wallpaper, and a contemporary plastic toy. It's about what has shaped my perception of the female, about heritage as passed down through generations. It is about DNA and the history we carry in it. This led to further investigation into the idea of connection. I wanted to move back in time, away from recorded history, and work with the language of nature, a primordial language, the language that binds us. I believe there is a nonverbal language that has been evolving in our DNA, at least since we were single-cell organisms. This language is still in us. It is a language based on the senses. And so I built abstract miniature models and dioramas to experiment with shape and color as an intuitive language, and ultimately from which to paint. I explored the sensations and body memories I could evoke through these sculptures and paintings. The painting called Heart evokes spider, rose, seaweed, nest, butterfly. The following one evokes body parts, tonsils, mouth, intestines, or landscape, stalactite, mountain range. This group of paintings is an exploration into how charged organic forms are with subliminal references. My current abstractions are more immediate. They are sensory mappings of the energy I feel around me. It is the energy between things, as well as the energy of things. I use all of my senses, eyes, ears, skin, nose, in a call and response that I do with the mark making as I paint. I try to access the primordial language of shape, color, and rhythm to express myself. I paint intuitively what I am experiencing subconsciously as well as consciously. I'll think about atoms, fish, wind, patterns of gas in the universe, the smell of the ocean. It is a dance between intent and random action. I'll lay down a mark, let it speak to me, and then I'll lay down another one. Through this process, I seek the harmony of nature, which is a beautiful balance of logical evolution and random moments of chaos. I work on several pieces at once, going from one to the other as I feel compelled. This offers distance so I can see where to go back into the painting. Sometimes certain passages may feel incomplete, immature, so I'll add complexity, depth, more history. Sometimes single marks or clusters feel insincere, like they are trying to be something rather than just being. In that case, I'll place random marks. Sometimes I'll drag a brush across a section to break it up and give it new opportunity to establish harmony. As I paint, I move around the work table and approach the painting from various angles. There are moments when I want to remove gravity, to allow the shapes to intertwine without the rule of external gravity, but rather an internal one. I'll imagine how gases and elements, atoms and molecules form and reform and evolve, how rivers bubble, trees decompose, and land masses move. Painting brings me closer to my center and to what grounds me in the world. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Irina. Actually, Irina was also one of the artists in Artist Choose Artist last year, and I was just struck by the beautiful rendering of these networks of organisms and cells and all that stuff that we're dealing with right now as well. So thank you. Next, Sarah Cohen is the administrator of the Stony Brook Southampton Hospital's Center for Parkinson's Disease. Sarah graduated from Columbia University's Doctor of Physical Therapy program in 2007 and worked at Stony Brook Southampton Hospital as a staff physical therapist for over 10 years. Sarah designed and launched the Center for Parkinson's Disease in September 2017. She was named winner of the 2019 Degenerative Diseases Special Interest Group Service Award in recognition of her tireless pursuit of improving the lives of individuals with Parkinson's disease who live on the East End of Long Island. She lives in Sag Harbor with her family. Please welcome Sarah Cohen.
Thank you, Corinne, for the introduction, and to everyone at the Parish Art Museum for inviting me to speak this evening. Parkinson's disease is the second most common neurodegenerative disorder, only after Alzheimer's disease. It is characterized by depletion of a neurotransmitter in the brain called dopamine and results in the cardinal motor symptoms of tremor, slowness of movement, stiffness, and changes in posture and balance. There are approximately 1 million people living with Parkinson's disease in the United States. Reports suggest that the prevalence of the disease has doubled in the past 20 years and will double again in the next 20. Some claim that if Parkinson's were an infectious disease, we would be talking about the Parkinson's pandemic. I did not come to Parkinson's research and care from a personal connection. I grew up in rural, small-town Indiana, more boy than either of my brothers, and shrouded in social anxieties and awkwardness. I found my voice in college, written in the pages of books, research articles, and numbers. As my career as a physical therapist developed, my penchant for data and research helped me to create a clinical niche working almost exclusively with people with Parkinson's disease. And as I did so, I noticed a trend. Many of my patients improved substantially, which, considering the progressive nature of the disease, is astounding. What did this suggest? That exercise and physical therapy improve how these individuals move, and by extension, their function and independence. And so I turned to the research. Could my small anecdotal findings be broadened to benefit a wider range of people living with the disease? And I found that I was not the only one asking this question. Over the past 30 to 40 years, there's been an explosion of research looking at some type of exercise modality and its effect on people with Parkinson's disease. And here's what I found in the research. People with Parkinson's disease are 29% less active than their peers, and this inactivity seems to start soon after diagnosis. People with Parkinson's are 2 times more likely to fall and have a 9-fold increase in repeated falls. The economic cost of Parkinson's disease in the United States in 2017 was $51 billion. But I also found that people in middle age who exercise are less likely to develop the disease in the first place. And if you increase the intensity of that exercise, the protection is more substantial. And what we definitively know, based on the numerous research trials, is that people with Parkinson's disease who exercise do better than those who don't. With such compelling evidence, why are we so inactive? On the simplest level, there aren't appropriate programs for people to access. There might be issues with transportation, and the overwhelming cost of healthcare makes the additional expense of gym memberships and fitness classes insurmountable. And so I set out to create a community-based wellness program providing fitness and cultural programming to people living with Parkinson's disease on the East End, designed carefully to mitigate the known barriers to exercise. With unwavering support from hospital administration at Stony Brook Southampton Hospital, the Center for Parkinson's Disease launched September 2017 with 2 programs, the Paint at the Parish program right here at the Parish Art Museum and Rock Steady Boxing at Epic Martial Arts in Sag Harbor. In March of this past year, we had 8 community-based programs in 6 communities across the East End. As our numbers grew, so did the sense of camaraderie, the strength of community, and from that, a shared goal and vision. We were no longer singers, boxers, or yogis. We became one community with one goal, fighting the progression of the disease. And so when our doors closed in March due to COVID-19, it was a previously unimaginable moment marked with uncertainty. With support from the hospital, my collaborating partners, and hours of tech support provided by participants' children of all ages, the Center for Parkinson's Disease reopened online, launching an array of virtual classes. The transition online opened unexpected opportunity. Sing Loud for PD now attracts over 100 singers joining weekly from all over the country, Canada, and even the UK. Some of whom live in underserved communities without previous access to Parkinson's-specific programs. Eat Well with PD is grounded in our local community, sourcing seasonal food from East End farms and integrating nutritional education and cooking instruction. We now meet virtually. My fabulous partners at the East End Food Institute hand-deliver meal kit boxes, including food, recipes, and a pre-recorded cooking video, so that we may come together for a shared meal experience on Zoom. Paint at the Parish is our flagship program. Under the direction of Kara and Wendy here at the museum, the class has been fully subscribed since we started in 2017, and we launched our very first online class this morning. One of our regular artists says it best: "This program almost makes me thankful I have Parkinson's." With support from Stony Brook Southampton Hospital, the American Parkinson's Disease Association, private donors, and institutional partners, all of these programs are offered at no charge to the participants. Rocksteady Boxing is a national boxing-inspired exercise program specifically for people with Parkinson's disease. The program started in 2006, coincidentally in my hometown of Indiana. There are now close to 900 affiliates worldwide. The Center for Parkinson's Disease supports 2 affiliate programs with close to 200 boxers. Since March, my amazing coaches have led over 300 online classes for a total of 3,500 class visits. Over half of our boxers have successfully transitioned to the online format, and while missing the in-person camaraderie, many welcome the ease of being able to exercise at home with more class offerings available. 6 months after launching the Center for Parkinson's Disease, in the spring of 2018, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. The diagnosis was crushing. I couldn't get out of bed. I stopped eating. I didn't work. My husband, Neil, finally said to me, "How can you ask your boxers to get up every day and fight if you're not willing to do so yourself?" And so I did get out of bed, and I chose to fight. A diagnosis of any illness comes with silver linings, which in my case were many. I've become deeply rooted in this community in which I live and work. Many in the Parkinson's community delivered food, offered to care for my girls, buy groceries, and share grief. And perhaps most importantly, it has provided me a compassion that no book or research article can teach. Now, when I receive that phone call, I've just been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and I don't know what to do. I know what I need to do. Let me stand beside you, and together, let's fight. Thank you very much.
Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your work and also your life with us. And I know how much we enjoy having your classes here with the Parkinson patients here at the parish, and how art can make a difference in these people's lives. And we wish you all the best. Next, Jody Cukier collects seashells and marine life fragments to create sculptures and abstract assemblies that she photographs to produce archival pigment prints. They celebrate the mesmerizing design elements found in nature, rely on the labor of hand collection, the patience of hand manipulation, and the meditative benefits of both. Her prints, as well as the broad array of the objects in which they are based, were first presented in a solo exhibition at the Curator Gallery in Chelsea, New York, titled "Come Shell or High Water." Jody's path, however, was not as direct as the many coastlines she has paced. A native of Long Island, Jody studied art and psychology at Harvard, where she received her BA. She then earned an MBA at Harvard Business School. It's interesting how many of you have been at business school and then turned to art. Relocating to the West Coast for a decades-long career in advertising and motion picture marketing. In a story of unthinkable upheaval that she will share with us today, Jody returned to her maker roots and to Long Island to focus on the full-time pursuit of artistic expression. Please welcome Jody Cukier.
I begin with an ending, when my daughter was killed crossing the street for a school bus in Los Angeles. As unbearable, as it sounds. I worked with Julia's friends and the entire community. We campaigned for street safety awareness and better bus stop regulation, trying always to incorporate art and the act of making. Being near the beach would allow me to explore new ideas, almost as if by sleight of hand, I found beauty that could fit in the palm of one. I also found a way to move forward with pieces left behind, searching and sifting, drawn to patterns in which that was broken. And so it began. I combed and collected, gathering specimens that looked like the way I felt, damaged and crushed. Shells and marine life fragments came to represent how elements of design endure despite a tumultuous journey. And for me, a purpose and a point of view began to emerge. As my collection grew, so did the graphic appeal of storing them. I was buoyed by the sight of them, treated them like little treasures. And they started to develop a vocabulary that sat side by side, relating to each other. They became animated, lifting my spirits. Speaking of spirits, oh my God, I just changed a page. Okay. This may look like chaos, but there's actually more going on. There's optimism, other than used beer flats. It's a symbol of hope. Bowls and vessels were among the first objects I assembled, glued from edge to edge, with shells broken and whole, weathered and worn, a hypnotic system of trial and error as each piece is selected. Although lightweight and fragile, they also feel strong and reassuring in the palms of my hands. I think many of us associate bowls with nourishment and nurturing, or precious objects that they hold, even memories, like ceramic bowls that my daughter made, which hold what's dear to me because they carry impression of her fingerprints. Those bowls weigh heavy in my hand. When I first started to put new mussels in a tray, it began more like a random piling on. I wasn't really thinking of it as anything more than a supply cabinet, a space-saving device. But as the piles got taller, the balancing got more precarious. And it was my balancing act about losing one's balance and working on how to regain it. When I was preparing to move back to New York, I took photographs for the first time because my mover needed an inventory. I didn't anticipate the transformation from one medium to another, how physical assemblies became something else, something more abstract when represented as photographic images. And in black and white, I find that they become even more disguised, more defined by their ascending size, white-rimmed edges, like puzzle pieces that are askew but somehow ordered, as I felt myself. Bundles of whelks, which are practically bursting out of this container, give you a good view of the tattered state I find them in. And by now, you know why I find that relatable. However tossed and tumbled, their design endures, and maybe so would I. They serve both as the basis of an art form and as a metaphor to live by. As I settled into a full-time home in Shinnecock Bay, the tranquility of my surroundings influenced my approach. I gave myself permission to alter edges, sand what was sharp, and reveal graceful forms preserved inside. Scallop shells, working with my hands. I can't believe I did that again. Okay. Working with my hands, sizing the shells, putting them in the order, colors, size, shape, and pattern, led me to other pieces and parts. As I gathered parts and pieces, I saw faces. I saw characters, and I began to call them different names. This is The Doctor Is In. Each of these characters had something to them, a look, like have a heart, why the long face, and Liverpool. Can you spot them? What I didn't give them was a gender. They simply had human qualities that evoked certain captions. But as the coronavirus began to take over the days and thoughts, I was looking for a way that it wouldn't infect, but maybe find a way to make it inspire. And so in a sliced up photograph, I started to think of this as shelter in space, representing loneliness and isolation, although creating it helped reduce that for me. Sharing it with others, even more so. Sometimes good things come in small packages, and in this case, that took the form of a sturgeon scale. I was intrigued by the pattern of holes and the way it fans out. It made me think of the cosmos, but also the body of a fish. So I added the skeleton of a tail fin, bringing it back down to earth. Working with my hands, how it feels to the touch is as important as the experience, but I never get to share it. So when an exhibit for the blind and sight impaired was looking for work that could be handled, I devised a way to do that, setting these into a resin base. More recently, my gaze has turned from shells to the shore and the fishing vessels that are encased by shells as well. And their unvarnished surface, weathered exterior, was similarly captivating. They were also marked by the dents and scars of a journey traveled. A lot of what I do is about training myself to see, but somehow I miss the profound connection between this pair of images. Placing them together offers me a rare moment, a rare mother-daughter moment. So as much as I regret saying everything about that, I want to thank you for giving it to me.
Jody, thank you so much for sharing your personal story of unimaginable loss with us. PechaKucha is about living creatively, and I think it's a testimony to creativity, how someone can transform such personal tragedy into something so beautiful. So thank you. Next and last, John Madere has a lifelong love of adventure, people, light, and shadow. Combining these four elements is his idea of the perfect photo shoot. He has made a career of photographing people all over the planet for the world's most well-known magazines, savviest ad agencies, and Fortune 100 companies. In pursuit of his own art, he has photographed numerous portrait series, often on the East End. Recent subjects have included surfer portraits, freeze frame, and on the water. John's latest series, Masked Portraits, was exhibited at the Hero Beach Club this past summer and has been adapted for public service ads emphasizing the need to wear a mask. John currently lives in Montauk, accepting private commissions for portraits and surfing whenever his schedule permits. Please welcome John Madere.
Last time.
Thanks, Corinne, and thanks to everyone who came tonight. This is a group portrait I shot of a bunch of engineers in New Delhi. They're designing a system of roadways that will help the lives of millions of Indians. It was my job to help tell their story in just one photograph. I'd like to share my creative process with you tonight. It centers around what I really love to do, which is portraiture. I'm based in New York City in Montauk, but my photography has taken me to over 50 countries, and my work often involves advanced planning, location scouting, photo assistance, and sometimes lots of lighting gear. But most of my favorite portraits start with the idea of revealing something essential about a person in a single moment. DJ Stout was the art director of Texas Monthly Magazine. It was his idea to symbolize his magazine career with this wooden frame, and it was my job to frame the scene at sunrise in the desert. I really enjoy traveling for work, though many of my favorite photographs have been taken in New York. John Sargent was the CEO of Macmillan Publishing. This balcony is just outside his office at the very top of the Flatiron Building. We propped the scene with dozens of Macmillan's bestsellers and made sure that the high winds wouldn't send John or his books plummeting down onto Fifth Avenue. I love to explore a theme by photographing a series of subjects who have something in common. I shot Dennis for a series that I was doing about people and their obsessions. He's a welder by profession, and he sculpted his own backyard dinosaur museum. This portrait shows both the terrifying and the cuddly aspect of his creations. And then there's the element of luck. This assignment in South America started at Lake Titicaca in Bolivia. We were scouting the shore when I spotted this bright, tiny red figure in the distance. A few minutes later, I was photographing Paulino Esteban standing in his reed boat wearing his everyday work clothes. Chris Storm's portrait was taken in Connecticut. I grew up in arid and landlocked San Antonio, and soon after college, I moved to New York. The city was, and still is, the epicenter of photography. I also discovered the natural beauty of the Northeast and the Hamptons. My work often brought me out east, and I started going to Montauk more and more frequently. Over the last 10 years, I began photographing and filming some of my fellow surfers, as well as many of the beautiful and eccentric denizens of Montauk. This guy is affectionately known as Jesus John. One of my portrait series came out of my desire to photograph surfers from a very unusual perspective, allowing me to show my subjects with their surfboards and Montauk's shoreline. These portraits were taken by pointing my camera straight down from a boom mounted on a huge stand 20 feet above my subjects. Brandon and Davina are a husband and wife team who own a popular surf club. I wanted to show their relationship to surfing and their growing family. My love for the ocean inspires me, but my life in the city has always provided a fascinating mix of subjects to photograph. Many of my clients are graphic designers, and I have a lot of respect for their talent and expertise. Milton Glaser is surrounded by a few of his most iconic posters, which I got to select from his archives. I set out to capture the personalities and creativity of some of America's leading graphic designers. Chip Kidd is the world's most famous book cover designer. I photographed him in his Upper East Side apartment, flanked by some of his covers and a crazy collection of superhero memorabilia. Deciding which of the thousands of fascinating objects in his apartment to include was one of the hardest parts of the shoot. Massimo and Leila Vignelli formed what was undoubtedly the most dynamic duo in modern design history. Although Massimo tended to get credit for many of their creations, I decided to put Leila in the foreground for this double portrait. Their simple and spare studio was like a temple of modernism. Designer Stefan Sagmeister is also an internationally recognized fine artist. This portrait was taken at an exhibition of his work at Deitch Projects in Soho. I had to shoot it in a tiny space while the gallery was full of admiring visitors. Meanwhile, back in Montauk, the more I surfed, the more I was compelled to photograph some of the people I met out in the waves. I wanted to capture their faces just as they came out of the frigid winter water. So I set up my camera and this canopy a few yards from one of Montauk's most popular surf breaks. This was one of the warmer days, around 45 degrees and windy. Not everyone looks this beautiful right after she finishes surfing in freezing cold water. The usual effect on one's face isn't what you'd call pretty. When I finish surfing in these conditions, I look like a wreck, but I feel more alive than ever. I think I found the weathered look in a number of my subjects, and especially with Vinny, who's been a dedicated surfer for much of his life. Montauk's beaches are also full of interesting characters who aren't surfers. I sometimes turn my camera on other beachgoers that have something in common. This year, the pandemic has brought a new kind of fashion to the beach. I believe in wearing a mask, except right now, and I wanted to photograph people who also cared enough to do that. I shot about 60 people for this series. These little girls were the youngest and definitely the most adorable. Wearing a mask wasn't this year's only political controversy. Tanish is a Montauk resident who's worked tirelessly to bring attention to the Black Lives Matter movement. She helped organize a huge march in Montauk last July. That fierce determination still shows behind her mask. With the help of some talented advertising professionals, My photographs were used in a public service ad campaign all over the Hamptons, including a couple of mini billboards. So thanks again for coming tonight, and if you'd like to see more of my work, you can see that on johnmadere.com. Thank you.
Thank you, John. You certainly have a knack for capturing the spectacle of color, and I wonder how much longer you will have to photograph masked people, but it's a wonderful project. Thank you. Thank you for all 5 presenters. Give them a big round of applause, and thank you everybody for coming out tonight. We plan to do the next PechaKucha in March. Thank you and good night.